Hey, 420 MSP. We are back with Joe over at Heartland, probably one of the most used names in business. So, hey, Joe, welcome back. Thank you for being one of our analysts and helping us with the cause. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me, Harry. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. Hey, so today, let's back up. Last time we talked, we kind of did a hello world and framed you up as sort of a master MSPs for MSPs who want to accelerate their journey into the cannabis vertical. Done. Today, I want to talk, in my mind's eye, I call it workloads or categories. You'll frame it up better than I, but I want to talk about the technology workloads. And in talking with you beforehand, you framed it up as the supply chain. So maybe could you kind of walk us through the supply chain and then get us to compliance at the end of that journey?
I mean, really what it boils down to is, if you kind of look at how the supply chain works, and I know this has been loosely used, going from seed to sale, you've got regulations, you've got different products that are being manufactured based on, the state, the reseller, the retail location, flower, edibles, et cetera, right on down the line. Supply chain is going to be niche and different for each one of those individual product sets. And, let's talk about edibles briefly and and shelf life and preservation, right? You start having to introduce refrigeration and cold chain into that. And that is completely different than just standard dry house warehousing. So the supply chain, goes all the way from, if you think about what you're creating in regards to, putting a seed in dirt and I'm growing it and I've got the water and the filtration systems. And then, you bring up compliance, you've got to label everything. You've got to say, I took a snippet from this plant and I cloned it and I got to be able to track it and I got to trace it. That's all supply chain. And everything that the technology talks to, network, back-end systems, end users, shipment updates, things like that, that's all supply chain. The convoluted part of that is that there seems to always be experts. There you got the guy who's an expert in compliance printing, you got the guy who's the expert in the manufacturing side, you got the POS expert. What you really want to do is you want to get from zero to hero a lot quicker because you don't have the time to go out and say, I got to find this guy, I got to find this guy, I got to find this guy. And a Heartland, for example, would actually help you tie all those loose ends together quickly because we are a supply chain expert throughout the entire process. And
So let me see if I can frame it up. I'm going to take a stab at this. So we're talking the technology workloads map to the supply chain. So you're going to have email, cybersecurity, some physical security, the video storage, ultimately data storage and protection,
correct.
File print, to use a 30-year-old term and how we got into local area networks. So it's really not that much different than just your traditional business, maybe with a couple quirks like compliance thrown in. Is that fair?
For sure. I mean, California, I think, has one of the better supply chain networks built up already, and it's very structured. You go from cultivation and then manufacturing, and then you go to a distribution end of it because then it has to go to testing. And then from testing, it goes back to distribution because then it has to go to delivery. And then forget testing, you also have a disposal component of testing, right? So that's also a part of that supply chain. Even though it's not ending up at an end user location, you still have to track it, you still have to trace it. It's still part of that supply chain. But once you go from delivery, then you go into the retail or the consumption lounge environment. It's all a flow. And that supply chain has to be supported. It has to be real time. It has to be tracked, traced. And that's not an easy thing to do. But I'm also going to be quite transparent here. It's also not unique to the cannabis industry. And the cannabis industry might have unique requirements, but supply chain in the end is supply chain. And this is kind of the world that cannabis is growing up in now, is a well-established supply chain.
You know what's funny is back in the, I'll call it the secular world, the traditional business community. A couple years ago, I was talking with someone. Well, yeah, you would know of Jay McBain over at Forrester, a principal analyst, and I'm an entrepreneur, and my head was spinning. And one fine day, and he said, Harry, supply chain's actually not all that sexy. I don't know if I can go around in the secular world saying supply chain,
Right.
and we enjoyed a chuckle. Now, matter of fact, in the cannabis industry, it is sexy, right? Because I think it helps the MSP understand the workflow. And I'm repeating myself, but you know what I'm saying? Our guys are trying to get their arms around this opportunity. Is it HIPAA healthcare? Is it supply chain? Is it retail? They're trying to wrap their head around it. And I think the supply chain paradigm is probably the best place to start. Does that make sense, instead of just
Without a doubt.
getting wackadoo?
Yeah, I mean, supply chain is a very broad and generic term for the industry because it really kind of just it brings the entire beginning to end thing into kind of one little pane of glass, for example. But in reality, I mean, yeah, it's not very sexy, but supply chain ultimately is what you're doing. You're creating a product and you're supplying it to a user.
Yeah.
And it has to flow, right? And it has to, and depending on where you are, there's going to be different needs, different requirements, different regulations. And the MSPs and the partners that you work with have to really kind of understand state by state regulations and how to navigate that and what those individual barriers to entry are going to be, right? So, and that's as this industry grows and evolves, and quite honestly, as it standardizes nationwide over time, getting ahead of that and understanding and growing alongside these end users and the other MSP partners in the world, having that positioned in a way that you're going to be able to both scale and support successfully is really what you're going to be focused on. The cannabis industry doesn't have time to go out and find all these solutions to be able to get from zero to hero quickly. A lot of these guys still do their day jobs as their businesses are getting up and running, right?
Yeah.
They go to these conventions for a reason because that's when they take time out of their day to really go figure out what they got to do. But in the most part, when you're trying to work with these businesses, you can't even talk to that main decision maker because he's doing his day job. The reality of it is that it's there's no time for them to go out and
No, I get it. Yeah.
Real. So having an MSP offering that can basically touch the entire supply chain is essential.
I like it. Hey, next time we thank you very much, by the way. Next time we get together, I want to double click into a strength of Heartland, and that, sir, be the barcode. So we have some marching orders, and thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate you joining us. You always you give more than you take, and we appreciate that.
I talk a lot. I like to hear myself talk. That's what makes me a sales guy, I guess.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harry. I appreciate the time.